good morning, Pearl, and thank you very much for making time for this interview this morning. It's wonderful to have you on to talk about suicide and depression today. So as we get started, let me let you introduce yourself quickly to the people who will be watching this.
Okay, thank you for having me. My name is Pearl Pelenda Bachunga. I'm a mental health advocate, and I'm the founder of an organization called Walk With Me Foundation. Walk With Me Foundation is a Zambian non-profit organization that deals in mental health awareness, advocacy, and support. So on the awareness bit, we aim to provide easy to read and accessible information on mental health and mental illness. We try to advocate for good policies and good governance for mental health. On the support bit, we provide peer support. So we run peer support groups. Our peer support groups are run by peers, and we have volunteers who are some of which are mental health professionals that act as moderators on the group. So each of our groups have got 15 participants each and 5 volunteers. So the groups that we have right now are anxiety and depression peer support groups.
Okay, that's wonderful. So Walk With Me Foundation, how does somebody get in touch with you if they want to volunteer or they need help?
Okay, so we have a Facebook page. Our Facebook page is Walk With Me Foundation. If you're searching for it on Facebook, it will be at Walk With Me ZM. Or they can get in touch with us on 0961 877 947.
Okay. All right, I'm sure people will catch that. If not, they can rewind and get the number again. But that's good to know that they can reach out to you on Facebook as well as through your cellular number. And of course, this is in Zambia. For those that maybe out of the country watching this, you need to put the country code +26 at the beginning of that. So, Pearl, I saw you posted recently about suicide and depression. So tell us about your focus on this area and why you think it's important for us to talk about this.
Okay, so I've been posting quite a bit about the different mental illnesses, depression, anxiety, and all the different mental health disorders as well. But I realized that with the increase in the number of suicides that has been happening over the past few months, I realized that not many people are actually talking about suicide. So it's something that we actually need to get the conversation going about. The rates are increasing and the awareness about it is very, very low. So I realized that the more we talk about it, the more educated people are going to be about suicide, about the risk factors of suicide, how they can help prevent suicide as well. And the people struggling with suicidal thoughts as well will know where exactly to get help, and that help is available for them.
Okay. Yes, I totally agree that over the past year, a few months, we've seen a lot of suicide cases on social media, and people waking up to find their friends have committed suicide and so on. I remember last year I wrote about the suicide of a prominent academic in South Africa. I won't mention names, but it's a well-known case. And people were wondering, how can somebody so successful, so well-known, so, outgoing, commit suicide? What happened? What went wrong? And so I wrote this article, and I remember also I presented at a conference about it in honor of him, though. And so it just highlighted that, this can affect anyone and anywhere. It doesn't matter whether you're successful or unsuccessful, poor or rich or whatever. These are issues that can affect us all in terms of depression and suicide. So I'll let you talk about it more now. Tell us about depression, suicide, and what you've learned or experienced around this.
Okay. Just a little bit. I'll just give you a little bit of background on the numbers as well, so that you see where I'm coming from with this.
Okay.
So in Zambia, well, let me first make this clear. We don't have a lot of data on suicide as well. There's not much research that has been done. Even the research that's been done by the WHO, for example, most of their data is put up as crude data. So there's not much
Yes.
defined data, there's not much information put up about this, but the numbers are still terrifying. Even if they're estimates, they're still quite high
Mm-hmm.
for estimates. And there's a
Okay.
lot of suicides that also go unrecorded.
Mm-hmm.
So people
Mm-hmm.
don't usually talk about them. Even if the person has committed suicide, the family will probably say it's something else, or they won't put it out there and say, yes, this is a suicide. So
For sure.
according to the WHO, for example, in Zambia alone, the suicide
Mm-hmm.
rate they have is about 6.1% of the total deaths that we have in Zambia, which
Oh,
is
really? That's
quite,
quite a lot.
yeah, that is quite high. And
Mm.
worldwide, they estimate about 800,000 deaths a year to suicide, which is like one
Okay.
person in every 40 seconds.
That's
And
quite a lot.
even
Mm.
it's a lot of people. And by 2020, they estimate that this number could go up to one person every 20 seconds. So that's pretty much
Wow.
doubling the number. So the numbers are
Okay.
quite huge. And if you think about it and think, okay, this is just an estimate, what do
Mm-hmm.
the real numbers actually look like?
Exactly. Well, that's quite scary because I know in Zambia, our data systems are not so strong. So for every case reported, you probably have several that go unreported
Exactly.
in any way, which is quite alarming. But so in those statistics, how does it look in terms of men, women, teenagers, and so on?
Okay, so it's for men. So
Hmm.
men's suicide rates are relatively quite higher.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's estimated about 8.8% in men
Hmm.
and 3.5% in women. Those are
Okay.
the estimates, yeah. And for me personally, I would like to agree with those statistics
Hmm.
because I guess in the society that we live in, men are not really allowed to speak about their emotions. They can't really come out and
For sure.
say, this is what I'm going through. I need help in this
Hmm.
and this. So it starts to eat them up. So which actually makes sense that men go through this a lot more. In
Sure.
teens,
Hmm.
yeah, in teens, the numbers actually vary. So
Hmm.
between ages of 10 to 29, I actually wrote down something. Um,
Okay.
between 10 and 29, it's actually about 60% of all the suicide that take place. About
Hmm.
60% of them are male and 40% are female. So it's like a 60-40 ratio.
Okay.
And these
Quite
numbers,
high.
yeah, the only time where I've seen that the male suicide rate is lower than the female suicide rate is between the ages of 15 to 19. At that time,
Uh,
the rates are almost like 55 to
mhm.
55, almost. And that's the only
Yeah.
time where the rates on the women and men are different. But other than that, it's usually more men that commit suicide than women. And
Yeah.
from the age of 10 to 15, it's relatively lower. The
Hmm.
suicide rates are they're not that high. So,
Yeah.
like 2016 data, I think they only had about 2,800 suicide deaths or something. So they weren't that
Okay.
high.
That
Yeah,
high in
but
those
then
age groups.
they start to increase from the time people turn about 15 going up. Previously, like in
Okay.
previous years, it was more with the elderly population, but over the last
Hmm.
2 years, it's actually reduced and is more prominent again amongst the youths now. So yeah, so
Okay.
the comparison is quite
Yeah.
interesting. But what stood out more for me is
Hmm.
the fact that in most of the data that they have, the
Yeah.
suicide rates are higher in men than in women in the
Then
different age,
women.
yeah, than women. Even
Yeah.
where it's slightly higher in men between 14 and I mean between 15 and 20, the difference
Hmm.
is not that much.
Yeah. Yeah.
The
Okay.
difference is not that much. So
For
generally,
sure.
if you look at it generally, the suicide rates are definitely higher in men than in women in all different age groups.
Yeah, I think that's a worldwide phenomenon. And one of the
Yeah.
factors you've mentioned already is men are less likely to talk about, if they're going through depression or issues like that. And so they internalize things and get to act on those things without seeking help. But one thing I noticed, even working as a doctor when I was still practicing clinical medicine, was men choose more aggressive means. of suicide. And so they're more likely to succeed, than women who choose less aggressive means. And whenever we had cases of attempted suicide at the hospital, it was mainly women who came in, having drunk poison or whatever. And so you could save them. But men would take more drastic means, hanging or firearms and things like that. And so they would often just come in already dead. So I think those are some of the issues that lead to those differences. So what are the risk factors then? How do we know that somebody's at risk of suicide?
So the number one risk factor actually is a previous suicide attempt.
Okay.
So if someone has attempted to commit suicide before, they are more likely to attempt and most probably succeed if no measures are taken after the first attempt.
I see.
Yeah. Other than that, it's usually as a result of mental illness. About 90% of suicides and attempted suicides are a result of mental illness. So mostly depression and mood disorders.
Yeah.
So depression and substance abuse as well.
Okay. Yes.
So these two cover the 90% of why suicides happen.
Sure.
Other than that, there's other risk factors like a financial problem. There's people who can't handle that stress as well as other people. So there's financial stress, the discrimination that comes with belonging to a minority group. Some people attempt suicide because of a breakup. Breakup.
Sure.
Previous history of suicide in the family as well is one of the risk factors. I read somewhere that an epidemic of suicides in the society is also one of them. It triggers other people around. So when suicides start to take place in one society, it actually triggers people in that society as well to start to commit suicide as well. So once one suicide
the copycat phenomenon.
Yes, you actually need to look into it and make sure that not everyone that's going to be triggered by that suicide is going to go through with it.
Exactly. So you mentioned one very important thing about alcohol and substance abuse. I was reading somewhere that actually that's one of the biggest risk factors because people are more likely to commit suicide actually when they've taken alcohol, they're drunk and things like that. So in our society especially, and I think worldwide, people are drinking more and more alcohol, especially younger people. So I think that is something that perhaps we need to look at. Have you had any experience around that?
So personally, no, I haven't had any experience around that. Most of the people that I know that have committed suicide, I think have been more on the depression side or mental illness side and the mood disorder side. But I know quite a few people as well that drink because they're depressed.
Exactly. Well, that was my point is if you're depressed and you take alcohol, you're more likely to be at risk of suicide when the factors are combined together, not just alcohol in isolation.
Definitely.
So yes, I think that is something. So, suppose I'm having these suicidal thoughts or thoughts of harming myself, what should I do?
So the first thing is you need to realize that a suicide episode is usually very temporal and it can be fixed. So you need to promise yourself and tell yourself that you're not going to do anything.
Okay.
So you need to know that I'm only going through this for now. It's not something that's permanent. I don't have to do this. There is help available. So that's the first thing you need to do. You need to realize where you are and what's going on with you. Another thing is to sort of, when you realize you're in this space, you need to stay away from harmful things. So any lethal means, anything that can actually get you to the point where you're doing what you're thinking about doing. So where you're actually thinking of committing suicide. If you have things around you that will take you to the point where you're actually going to do it, obviously at a higher risk of committing suicide. So you need to stay away from any lethal means. Another thing is to reach out for help.
Exactly.
Yeah. Don't keep it to yourself. Actually speak to someone about it. It doesn't have to be the first person you speak to, doesn't have to be a mental health professional or whatever it is. Speak to anyone around you Tell them this is what you're
Mm-hmm.
going through, this is what you're experiencing, and which is why it brings me back to my point about educating everyone around us about suicide. If
Sure.
people around you know about suicide as well, they've educated themselves about it, they're not going to think you're being dramatic or looking for attention or whatever it is. So it's everyone's
Mm-hmm.
duty to make sure that me who's struggling with suicide is protected from actually committing suicide. So reach
Yeah.
out for help. Take yourself to the nearest health facility. You don't have
Mm-hmm.
to go out looking for a psychiatric hospital or a psychologist specifically. You can actually walk to your nearest clinic, speak to someone there, tell them this is what you're going through. It's your first line of help. Go out
Yeah.
and look for the help. Yeah. So those are some of the things that you can do when you're struggling.
I think those are very important. I mean, you talked about, ensuring you don't have access to means. So I think this includes things like firearms, drugs, just
Knives.
making sure
Don't
you don't have those things accessible to you if you're feeling that way. But one
exactly.
of the important things you've talked about is the issue of talking. And I was, in my research around depression, found that isolation, either emotional isolation or social
Yep,
isolation, is a
definitely.
big factor in such things, not just depression, but suicide as well.
There.
What can you say about that?
So that's a good point actually, because um one of the things that lead to someone thinking about suicide is them feeling like they're all alone in this, they're feeling
Mm-hmm.
isolated in all of this. So if I'm feeling like that, I don't have anyone to go out to, I don't have anyone to reach out to, because I'm
Yeah.
on my own in this. So
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very important for those around us to make us believe that, or let us know that we're not alone in all of this. Even if it's just one person that makes me realize that I'm not alone in all of this, I'm not isolated, I don't have to isolate myself. It's
Yeah.
one step ahead of me not committing suicide. So that's a
Yeah.
very good point, and I agree with you. Isolation is actually one of the things that leads people to have suicidal thoughts or commit suicide. So it's
Exactly.
important to also have a strong support system. When you know that
Mm-hmm.
this person around me is at risk of suicide, make sure these people are not left alone. If someone reaches out to you and tells you that I'm having thoughts about suicide, don't just leave them there on their own after you talk about it and tell them, oh no, don't commit suicide. Don't leave them on their
Yeah.
own. They're actually still at risk for
Mm-hmm.
it. So it's your duty to actually go out and make sure these people get help as well.
For sure. Well, that's a very good point about isolation, and I think it's very important for people to realize that you're not alone. You shouldn't be alone. There's so many
Yeah.
ways to get help, that you should get that help. But just from to cover that, so what you've covered it sort of, but just like to get into it in more detail. What help is there around there? You talked about going to the health facility and so on. What help is there for me if I need to address this?
Oh, okay. So personally, I like to use the
Mm-hmm.
3 R's suicide prevention.
Okay.
So this mostly relates to everyone else around me as well. It can relate to
Mm-hmm.
me who's struggling with suicide thoughts as well. So the first
Okay.
R I like to use is it's the 3 R's. Sorry, let me just think them through.
Okay.
Recognize. So the first R is to recognize the signs. So I should
Yeah.
recognize that this is what I'm going through. This is what I'm thinking about. Everyone around
Sure.
me as well should recognize some of the signs. Just to go
Mm.
in a little bit of detail about the signs, there's quite a number of signs that you can look out for.
Sure.
Usually, when someone is attempting suicide, they do show signs. So
Mm-hmm.
they speak about death. They start to give away their personal items. They involve themselves in very harmful behavior like drinking and substance abuse, taking
Mm-hmm.
drugs, those things. Um,
Yeah.
Self-harm, cutting themselves is also another sign that you can look out for.
Sure.
They usually isolate themselves as well. This person will keep
Mm-hmm.
to themselves, and they stop enjoying things that they usually used to enjoy. So you find someone who would like to spend time with family, and they'll just completely isolate themselves and pull back from that. And
Yeah.
which leads me to the second side, the second R that I like to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
which is out.
Mm-hmm.
So when you notice these signs, it doesn't hurt to actually talk to the person and ask them what's going on with you. Are you thinking about harming yourself? You've been talking about this quite a lot. Why are you feeling like this? Reassure them and like let them know that you can help them. There is help available. You care about them, and they're not going through this on their own. And remind them that it's also very temporary. So the second R would be to reach out. The third one is to refer them to help. So just keep in mind where you can get help, where these people can get help. Like I said, you can go to your nearest healthcare facility. It can be a clinic, it can be a hospital. You can get help there. There's a few people have suicide hotlines. I think Lifeline has one, and Psych Health Zambia also offers free suicide intervention. So those would be good numbers to keep. You can also call someone that's with them. If this person has told you over the phone that this is what they're going through, try and think about the closest person to them. If you're a bit far from them, think about the person who's closest to them. Call this person and let them know that this is what this person is thinking about and this is what they're going through. Let that person actually sit with them until help comes, or until a point where you can get there and get them to professional help. So you get to the third R, you need to actually make sure that this person is getting help. You've referred them to help. If you can call an ambulance, call an ambulance. Like, just make sure that this person actually gets the help they need. As soon as they get this help, you get them to a mental health professional, get them to a clinic. The clinic will probably refer them to the help that they need. If there's no therapist or counselor at that clinic, they'll know where to refer them to. And like I said in the beginning, suicide episodes are usually very temporal, and they can actually, you can get through it by going through therapy, being given medication. Depending on your diagnosis, there is actually help for it, and you can actually go through it and get through it. Yeah.
Great. Wow, that's a very useful acronym to remember, the 3 R's. So let me just summarize that. It's recognize the signs, reach out, and refer for help. So that applies to both the person who might be going through this thing of having suicidal thoughts and the people around them. We all need to be aware of these 3 R's and be prepared in case we find ourselves in such a situation. I like the point you raised about the fact that such times are temporal, and the circumstances around what might be making somebody want to commit suicide are temporal, because I was actually reading something that said, and one study that looked at that in seniors found that actually those that were thinking about suicide were not evaluating all the facts about their situation correctly. That maybe they were so focused on one aspect of their life that they were forgetting other issues that support that decision, and also just not realizing that the issues that were bothering them were temporal and would not be relevant a few months from now, a year from now, and so on. So I think that's always important to, of course, when somebody is going through depression, that may be hard to realize, but it's something to bear in mind, both for the person going through it and the people around them, is sometimes how to support them through that situation that's affecting them so badly. Like you're saying, if it's a financial situation, if it's a relationship situation, those are temporal things that can be fixed in the long run. And so it might be a question of how to support the person through that.
Definitely.
So, yes, go on. You wanted to add to that?
I actually agree with that. I've actually been in a situation which is what got me here, actually. I started my mental health advocacy because I personally struggled with mental illness. I struggled with depression for a long time, and I was actually suicidal and actually attempted suicide. Well, almost attempted suicide. And the person that saved my life was not a mental health professional, was actually a cab driver.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So interestingly, he noticed that I wasn't okay. And he dropped me off where I asked him to drop me off. And when he dropped me off, he sent me a message telling me how I shouldn't worry about it, and God loves me, and he's noticed that I'm going through something, but whatever it is that I'm going through can actually be fixed. And when I got the message from him, my first thought after that was, oh my God, what am I doing? let me actually
Yeah.
call my therapist. And I called my therapist, and I went and I spoke to my therapist, and I went on and continued therapy after that, and I haven't been suicidal after that. So I've
Okay.
gone on to live my life completely better, a lot
Yeah.
better. Yes, I still have like a few down days, but not to
Oh,
a point where I'm harming myself or trying to harm myself. I haven't actually thought about suicide after that. So it is very temporal.
yeah.
I'm here. I'm
Yes.
working on mental health and mental illness. So yeah. So
Exactly. Well,
definitely you
that's a
can get through it. Yeah, you
yeah.
can get through it. Something that you can go past. You can get past it.
Yeah. I
Yeah.
think that's a very, very, very wonderful story for three reasons for me that I pick out from you. One is that help can come from the most unlikely places. And that's why it's
Exactly.
important for all of us to be so aware that we can have such an impact in somebody's life. I mean, there you are, a truck driver reached out to you and changed something in you that made you get help. So if he hadn't acted, imagine. So I think we should all not underestimate the
Exactly.
power of what we say can have on somebody's life. But the second thing
Exactly.
is you sought help. You realized that you needed
Exactly.
help
I
and you
actually
went to
realized
get
that there's
help.
some
Yeah. And the
definitely.
third thing I like about that story, Pearl, is that, it's the issue of turning our lemons into lemonade. So there you are, you went through this, and now you are a mental health advocate. You've opened a foundation to help people with mental health issues. And
Yeah.
and it's a similar thing to me. I went through depression. It was so bad, but here I am now talking about it and trying to help others. So we can
Exactly.
always find a positive side to our experiences if we go through them.
Definitely.
Yeah, so that's very encouraging and a wonderful story. You should share more about that actually.
I actually have a
But maybe
talk. I
that's
did a talk about it. So I'm going
okay.
to share it. I did like a whole TED Talk style
Oh,
talk about it. So I will share
really?
it. I just haven't had the time to actually download the video, but I will share it.
Please share it, or if it's on YouTube, so that I can put it up with this interview on my website so that people can watch the two together. I think it'll be very inspiring for them. Story. So I think we've covered a lot about how to recognize depression. I mean, suicide risk in yourself, getting help, and so on. And you've covered a little bit about what somebody who is not going through it might, how best they can support somebody having suicidal self-harm thoughts. So I'd just like to cover one thing is, what do you say and what do you not say to somebody that tells you they're having suicidal thoughts?
Okay, so interestingly, a lot of people think if you reach out to someone and ask them directly if they're thinking of harming themselves, they're probably going to do it.
Mm-hmm.
But statistics show that they actually don't, because you've spoken to them about it and they know that someone actually cares and understands what they're going through. So you can
Okay.
actually reach out to this person and ask them what's happening with them. Ask them if they're
Mm-hmm.
thinking about harming themselves. Ask them why they're constantly talking about death and talking about hurting themselves and talking about leaving. You can actually reach out and speak to them and ask them if they're actually thinking about suicide. So reach
Okay.
out and ask them if they're thinking about suicide. Ask them if they're thinking of harming themselves. Remind them that they don't have to be thinking about suicide, or they don't have to commit suicide. Yeah. So
Exactly. Okay.
yeah, it's
So
actually
talking
important.
about
Just
it does help.
speak to some. It does help. It does help.
Okay.
Just speak to the person and help them realize that there is someone who understands what they're going through. They're not going
Yeah.
through it because there's anything wrong,
Sure.
completely wrong with them. They're going through it
Mm-hmm.
because, like any other illness, they've got an illness. They've got a mental illness. The same way when they have malaria or they have a headache, they would think of going to see a doctor. Is the same way that if you're having suicidal thoughts, it's okay for you to go and speak to a professional about it as well. So it's okay
For
to
sure.
actually reach out and talk to them about
Talk
it and
about it.
ask them if they're thinking of hurting themselves.
Okay, that's very good because I think a lot of people are just scared to approach that subject totally and
Exactly.
so on and shy away from it. So it's encouraging to know that actually does help the person going through this if you actually just talk to them about it. And
It does.
I like the point you raised about being understanding and supportive, because I think some of the things I know that you should avoid is things like telling them, "Oh, you're crazy," Why are you thinking
They're
that,
looking for
don't and
attention.
do that. You're looking for attention and so on. And I
Yeah,
think those are the wrong approaches. It's better to say things like, oh, sorry, you feel that way. I understand it's hard for you. You get through this. I'm here to support you. I think those are the kinds of things people should say rather than being judgmental. I think that shuts down the person even more
exactly.
when you're judgmental.
Interestingly, one of the things that we always encourage in our support groups is offer support and not advice. So I always tell everyone, I'm like, be supportive, be there for the person, tell them you understand what they're going through, you're there for them, but don't give them advice. Don't tell them, no, stop doing that. For me, I wouldn't be thinking about that. I wouldn't do that. When I've thought about that, this is what I've done. Like at that point, they do not need your advice. What they need is your support.
You're very right. And I think that also can be a way of easing the tension on people to help others, because sometimes the people that I am in contact with who are helping others going through such situations, they always come to me and say, I don't know what to say, what advice should I give this person? And I'm always like, you don't have to give them any advice. Just listen to them. Tell them, just understand. And that's your role. They just want somebody to listen to you. You don't have to feel like you have to offer them solutions to what they're going through. It's not up to you. You can find ways to refer them to somebody who might help them with those solutions, but it's not your task. And so I think if people realize that, they'll feel less pressure and shy away from these issues less if they just realize that all you have to do is be there for the person and not advise them necessarily.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay. Well, Pearl, we've had a very choppy internet connection. It's been on and off. I'll splice these videos together and get the interview flowing smoothly. But any last words as we wind up this topic around suicide and depression? Anything else you'd like to say?
I just want to go back and remind everyone that, what, suicide prevention is actually everyone's business. It's not only for the person that's going through it. It's not only for the person that's attempted suicide. It's not only for the mental health professionals or medical professionals. It's everyone's business, and everyone can actually help in suicide prevention. I think the three R's that I use: recognize, reach out, and refer, are pretty easy.
Okay, so I think that's the take-home message from this interview: is recognize the signs, reach out, and refer the person for help, and just be there for them.
Definitely. Yeah.
So, Pro, I really appreciate your time. I'm sure we will get to talk more and maybe have another interview on another topic. But I'm so happy that you're so passionate about this topic, and we're mobilizing people to get involved in depression and mental health issues. And I would like to wish you all the best in these endeavors. And I hope people will reach out to you on your web pages, Facebook, and your phone number, which you've given in this interview. Thanks very much, and have a great day.
Thank you so much for having me.